That is, the parts of your body that allow your body to move, the muscular system. And what we'll do is we'll take a look at this guy, Jed, a high school junior, and we'll see how his muscular system helps him lift weights as he becomes more interested in becoming a bodybuilder. So we'll see like the role his muscular system plays. It does more than just move your body around. It also helps to produce heat by shivering, and it does some other things like maintaining your posture, helps circulating your blood. So it does do a lot of things in your body, but typically we think of the muscular system as the only contractile tissue in your body. So it helps your body to be able to move, which is why you can do all the kind of movements that you can do. So let's take a look at Jed and some of his major muscles and some of the ways that he could exercise those muscles and how that muscle contraction works. To start with, there's three major kinds of muscle. Three major kinds of muscle: cardiac, skeletal, and smooth. Cardiac muscle is located just in your heart. Skeletal muscle is attached to bones, and that's what primarily helps us move around, pulling on those bones as levers. And then smooth muscle is muscle that you can't control. It typically lines your internal organs and your blood vessels, and it contracts but without your conscious control. There's a few other distinguishing characteristics of these kinds of muscles. Skeletal muscle has these distinct stripes or bands or striations in it. Cardiac muscle also has those distinct stripes and bands, but smooth muscle does not. Smooth muscle you cannot control. It's involuntary. So your muscles are contracting, but it's outside of your conscious control. Cardiac muscle is also outside of your conscious control, but skeletal muscle is voluntary and you can control it. Of those three muscle types, which can we work out? So when we go work out, which ones can we help to build up to get stronger? Well, certainly skeletal muscle. Every time you lift weights, you can build skeletal muscle. But also cardiac muscle. So cardiovascular training when you're running, trying to get your heart to beat faster to get to be stronger. So we can increase the strength of our cardiac muscle as well. So which is which? Well, we notice the distinct striations. That's going to make it skeletal muscle that we can control. Cardiac muscle has these distinct branches. They also have striations, but that branching helps it to be identified as cardiac muscle. And then smooth muscle is what lines the internal organs. Muscle has four major characteristics that are unique to muscle. One is its ability to shorten, it's contractile. There's no really tissue in the body that can do that. The interesting thing about muscle is it doesn't just contract, it can also extend, kind of stretch out like a rubber band. So in that sense, it's extensible. It's able to stretch. But even more interesting, it doesn't just stretch like a piece of taffy, like saltwater taffy. You just pull it out and stretch it and then let it go and it stays like blah. It also returns to its original length, like a rubber band. It doesn't just stretch out, but it can return to its original length. So we have that ability to stretch, but then it can return, which makes muscle interesting. And then it can respond to stimuli. It's excitable. So someone throws something at you and you catch it. So it's excitable. Muscle can respond to stimuli. So if Jed is curling his arm many times in a row, which characteristic is this? Well, its ability to shorten and its ability to lengthen. If he does a sit and reach, he's stretching. That's his ability to extend and then return to his original length. If he catches a ball, he's responding to stimuli. So muscle has these interesting characteristics. It can do these things. Let's take a look at these three kinds of muscle and try to categorize like what are some things they can do. So for example, maintaining your posture. That's a job of mostly skeletal muscle. Even though you often don't think about it, skeletal muscle is pulling on that bone to maintain your posture. Here's a good way to kind of get it into your mind. If you're walking down an alley and someone hits you on the back of your head and you go unconscious, what happens to your posture? Well, you collapse, right? Because your conscious mind is keeping those muscles contracted. So if you were ever to go unconscious, you also lose your posture. How about movement? When we think about movement, that's typically skeletal muscle. How about voluntary? Well, that's also skeletal muscle because we can control it. How about circulating blood? That looks like smooth muscle because that's going to line your arteries and veins. Same with dilating blood vessels. So you can't think about your blood vessels and make them dilate, get bigger. But your body does it anyway, especially whenever you're in stressful situations. So blood vessels will dilate. Moving food around, that seems like smooth muscle. We don't get to control it. There we are with our breakfast in our belly, and we're like, can't make it move to our small intestine any more than we can make it move to our esophagus. It's out of our control. That's smooth muscle that moves it around. Producing heat, usually by shivering. That's going to be skeletal muscle. So even though you can't really control your shivering, it's skeletal muscle that's contracting. And then secreting. Secretion is a job for the smooth muscle, and that's because that smooth muscle will act on that gland and help secrete that material. So what about cardiac muscle then? What does cardiac muscle do? Well, part of what cardiac muscle does is it also helps to circulate your blood. So not just your blood vessels are involved with that, but cardiac muscle also can help circulate your blood. Because that's its primary job. Every time the heart beats, the blood gets circulated around the body. So cardiac muscle's primary job is circulate. Here's a picture of poor posture and some posture problems. Upper cross syndrome is when there's weak muscles along the back. They're stretched and elongated, whereas the front, the muscles are tight. Usually that's the result of being hunched over for a long period of time. For example, when you're on your keyboard, your shoulders are kind of hunched forward, your head's kind of slumped forward, and your pectoralis muscles, your chest muscles pull in tight and they stay that way. Your back muscles lengthen. So you have this problem, upper cross syndrome. Upper cross syndrome then can lead to very predictable injuries and health problems like constant headaches is one of the results, as well as rotator cuff injuries tend to be a problem with upper cross syndrome. Lower cross syndrome is similar, but in this case, the pelvis is taking an anterior tilt. It's being pulled forward by the tight quadricep muscles and the weak or stretched hamstring muscle. So it's rotating the pelvis forward. So similarly, there are predictable injuries as a result. The interesting thing about posture like this is that it's muscles, and muscles are contractile and elastic and extensible, and they can change. So if we could strengthen these back muscles to pull those shoulders back in place and stretch out these pectoralis muscles, we can rotate those shoulders back in line. Same with the pelvis here. If we could strengthen these hamstring muscles and stretch these quadricep muscles, we can rotate the pelvis back into proper alignment. So with some exercises, we can adjust this posture, correct it, or this posture and correct it by strengthening certain muscles and stretching others. So posture problems are correctable. So don't think about your skeleton and your muscular system as being static and stuck the way they are. Think about them as being dynamic and able to change. So here are some of the major muscles. Let's take a look at what some of them are. Number one, the muscle that raises your eyebrow, frontalis, your frontalis muscle. Like you're able to raise your eyebrows, frontalis muscle. Your triceps, that's the muscle in the back here, and you can flex those by straightening your arm. Your biceps, this muscle here, that muscle curls your arm, brings your arm in, it flexes your arm. Number 7 is your deltoid, and it looks kind of like a delta. Think about like the Greek letter delta, looks like a triangle. Turn it upside down. That's what your shoulder looks like, kind of this triangle shape. Deltoid, which raises your arm. Number 8 is your pectoralis major, your large chest muscle that you use to push things. Number 4 is your external obliques, the muscles that help you go from side to side. So if you were at a concert, you're holding your lighter, you go from side to side. That's your external obliques. Number 9 is your rectus abdominis, your washboard abs, your rectus abdominis. Number 10 is your quadriceps. So there's 4 muscles there together that help to extend your leg, your quadriceps. Number 5 is this long muscle called the sartorius. It starts on the outside of your hip and goes to the inside of your knee, your sartorius. Number 6 is your gastrocnemius. We sometimes call it your calf muscle, the muscle you can use to walk on your tiptoes, your calf muscle. In the back, number 7 is still your triceps. Number 1 is your deltoid. Number 6 is your trapezius, the muscle that you would use to shrug your shoulders. So shrug your shoulders, that's your trapezius muscle. It's a big kind of diamond-shaped muscle in your back. Making this kind of V shape in your back are your latissimus dorsi muscles, the muscle you would use to bring your arm down. So you raise it up with your deltoid, but you bring it down with your latissimus dorsi. Number 5 is probably the most popular muscle, gluteus maximus, probably the most popular one to say. Gluteus maximus is actually your largest muscle in your body, typically. Number 3 is pointing to your hamstring. So there's 3 muscles there that work together to curl your leg. Hamstring. So if you were like in the Princess Diaries and you got that special kiss in your leg, boom, then that's your hamstrings doing that. Your hamstrings, causing that little pop. And then number 4 down here, that's your soleus muscle. Your soleus muscle. So there's some of the major muscles. And muscles tend to work in pairs. Sometimes those pairs are antagonistic. In other words, one muscle will contract when the other relaxes. So for example, for your arm, your biceps contracting while your tricep is extended. But then your tricep will contract and your bicep will extend. And they're antagonistic. They work against each other. Other muscles are synergistic. That is, they contract at the same time. They work together. So for example, all 4 of those quadricep muscles are working together to extend the leg, or all 3 of the hamstring muscles work together to curl the leg. They're synergistic. They contract at the same time. So here's an example of someone curling some weight. You can see that as the bicep is being extended, the tricep is flexed, or as the bicep is flexed, the tricep is extended. So if the arm is flexed, then that's going to make the bicep the flexed one. The tricep will be the relaxed or extended one. Where the muscle attaches to the bone, that's called a tendon. So tendons are where muscles attach to bone. The part of the muscle that moves the most, that's called the insertion of the muscle. The part of the muscle that moves the least, that's called the origin of the muscle. So think of the origin as kind of like the anchor. So the muscle is anchored here in the shoulder, the acromion process here in the shoulder, the bicep is. And whenever the bicep contracts, the muscle is being pulled toward the shoulder. So this is the origin. The insertion is where it's being pulled like toward the shoulder. And then the middle part of the muscle is called the body of the muscle. So everyone has about the same number of muscle cells, like in all of your muscles. Everyone has about the same number of muscle cells. So what makes Arnold, big Arnold, so muscular? And what makes other people scrawny, smaller, when they all have about the same muscle cells? What's the size of the muscle cell? So as you're exercising and working out, the size of the muscle cell itself will get larger. So let's see how a muscle is kind of broken down into these bundles of bundles. So here's our major bicep. It consists of lots of bundles of muscle cells. That bundle, though, is also a bundle of cells. This bundle consists of, again, a large number of muscle cells. And then finally, here we have an individual muscle cell. So let's take a look at a muscle cell. Here's a muscle cell. It's going to be part of this large bundle of muscles. We call that a fascicle. This fascicle is part of a larger set of bundles, which is part of a larger set of bundles, which is part of the actual whole muscle itself. So I just kind of illustrated it with like some pencils. Like here we have a fascicle consisting of several muscle cells, and that's part of a larger bundle of muscle cells, all covered with connective tissue. And then we have my individual muscle fiber or individual muscle cell, like the individual pencils. But each bundle is surrounded by tissue. Each of those bundles are part of a larger bundle surrounded by tissue. And that tissue extends away from those muscle cells, away from those bundles, and into the bone, and this is what we call a tendon. All right, so the tendon is kind of wrapped in amongst all those, this tissue that's kind of wrapped in amongst all those muscle bundles, fascicles, we call them. So think of a muscle as bundles and bundles and bundles and bundles, kind of like fiber optic cable, but lots of large bundles of muscle cells. And that's an individual muscle cell, very long, and inside of it, it has lots of other little things. We call those myofibrils, the parts of a muscle cell. So let's take a section or segment of a muscle cell, and let's take a look at what it looks like on the inside of that muscle cell. So it's kind of divided into these sections or segments. Each of those sections or segments, we call those a sarcomere. So the section or segment we call a sarcomere. A sarcomere goes from one Z-line to another. These Z-lines are made up of proteins. They kind of make this Z-shaped band. And that overlapping protein gives the muscle that dark, striated look. And it's from that overlapping protein that we get the actual muscle contracting. They kind of contract like an accordion. So those individual sarcomeres are called the contractile units. So the muscle's going to contract from one sarcomere end to the other. That section will contract. Then the other sarcomere to the next will contract. And as each of these individual sections contract, the whole muscle cell can contract and get smaller. So a Z-line to a Z-line makes a sarcomere. And in that sarcomere, these overlapping protein bands of actin and myosin. So let's take a look at one blown up a little bit bigger. Here's my Z-line on this side, Z-line on this side, my actin and myosin in the middle. All right, so the actin and myosin, those are called myofibrils, filaments, these parts to it. All right, so inside of my muscle cell are these myofibrils, this section in the sarcomere consisting of groups of myofilaments, these proteins that are in there. Each myofilament has two parts, the thick part and the thin part. The myosin is the thick part, the actin is the thin part. Actin are more numerous, myosin less numerous. So let's take a look again. Here's my sarcomere, Z-line to Z-line. Inside are some myofibrils and filaments. And we're going to look at these myofibrils, filaments here, where we have the myosin, the thick one, actin, the more numerous and thinner ones. Z-line to Z-line. Notice that the sarcomere, as it shortens, that's how the muscle contracts. So if Jed starts taking some supplements, amino acids, to build proteins in his muscle to get his muscle cells to get larger, some of those amino acids then are going to be used to make actin and myosin, these protein bands, so that his muscle cells can get larger and they can contract with more force. So which is not a type of muscle? Well, cardiac skeletal smooth are, so cranial is not. Muscles typically work in pairs, which is not a characteristic of muscles. They are excitable, they are extensible, they are flexible, they can stretch. Muscles that contract at the same time are called synergistic muscles. Contract at the same time, synergistic. A sarcomere is the contractile unit of the muscle. So let's take a look at how muscles contract at the molecular level. And this is usually described as the sliding filament theory. In other words, how these filaments, these myofilaments, are sliding past each other, the actin and the myosin, how they slide past each other. It starts with step one, a resting sarcomere. So everything is just at rest, and we'll kind of start there. Everything is just resting. But when this signal comes, first thing that's going to happen is there's going to be a cross bridge that forms between the actin and the myosin. This cross bridge will form here. All right, so first thing that happens, a cross bridge will form, a connection between the actin and the myosin. The second thing will happen is called the power stroke. That is, this kind of golf club-like head on the myosin will kick forward and propel the actin this way, kind of like pulls the actin in toward the center of the sarcomere, like pulls it in. But that's going to cost some energy. It's going to cost some energy then to detach and recock that myosin head that kind of looks like a golf club. To cock it back, that takes some energy as well. So think of it kind of like a mousetrap. The real energy is spent in setting the trap. And then that energy gets expended as soon as the trap gets sprung, so that it kicks up. Then it takes energy again to cock it back. So similar here, like a hammer on a pistol or a mousetrap, the energy is really spent in cocking that hammer back. And then whenever the signal comes, it'll help push that actin forward. But the energy is really spent in cocking it back. So now we have detachment, and then they can slide back to their original positions, and the sarcomere is at rest once more. But notice that there's some safeguards here, so that your muscles just don't contract willy-nilly. There's some things that have to happen so your brain can control when your muscles contract. Namely, these binding sites are covered by trypamine, trypamycin. So the trypamine, trypamycin are other proteins. They're going to prevent that cross bridge from happening until calcium floods the sarcomere. So calcium can remove that safety, expose that binding site, and then allow that actin and myosin cross bridge to form and the muscle to contract. So calcium is essential for muscle contractions. Let's watch how that kind of plays out. So here we have the nerve impulse, releases the calcium, clears the safety, the trypamine, trypamycin, so that the myosin can attach to the actin. Notice how the energy is expended to recock the myosin and get it back in place. Let's watch it again. The calcium comes in, clears the binding site, allows the attachment, power stroke, energy is required to recock the myosin head, calcium gets reabsorbed, and the sarcomere goes back to rest. Once more. So let's watch what happens then as you're contracting your muscles with all the actin and myosin cross bridges forming, allowing those muscles to shorten, and then when they relax to lengthen, to shorten. So here's the sarcomere again, kind of up close. You can see how this contraction works. All right. So look at all these cross bridges forming, pulling the actin in toward the middle, shortening the sarcomere so that the whole muscle can contract. So long as there's ATP present, so long as there's energy present, the muscles can relax. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but remember the energy is spent in cocking that head back. So once that energy is spent, the muscle's in a relaxed state, waiting for the stimulus to cause it to form the cross bridge, power stroke, slide past each other. So long as there's ATP present, the muscle can relax. Without ATP though, that's going to impact the cross bridging, because now the cross bridges will occur, but then they're not going to be able to detach. Instead, they'll stay contracted. So muscles can contract so long as ATP is present. But without that ATP, the problem is that the muscles can't relax. So that's why sometimes we call a corpse a stiff, because the muscles have all contracted and then they've locked in place. Without that ATP being produced, the muscles can't relax. So let's say that Jed kind of stumbles along and he finds his corpse and it's cold and stiff. So typically this happens, so a person dies 1 to 2 hours after they die. Their body will just start to stiffen up. And it'll stay stiff for several hours, but usually it takes about 3 hours for the body to kind of lock up and stiffen up. So if it's a cold, stiff corpse, then that lets Jed know it's been dead, probably between 3 and 4 hours. If it's warm and stiff, that means it probably hasn't been dead quite that long. If it's cold but limp, it's probably been dead for several days, or maybe even at least 24 hours or so, because after a while, that protein starts to break down and decompose like everything else in the body. But if it's warm and limp, that means it hasn't yet even been dead for 1 to 2. It's only been dead maybe 1 to 2 hours because it hasn't stiffened up yet. So coroners and forensic scientists can use kind of the way these muscles work to determine time of death. So based on like how those muscles have stiffened up or the temperature of the body, they can see how long that person's been dead. So how do muscles contract then? When you think about a muscle contracting, what are these steps that have to happen? Because nerves play a role too. Your brain sends a message to those muscles to cause it to contract. The brain sends a message. That message is in the form of a chemical, acetylcholine, ACH, that's going to be released at the neurotransmitter, and that's what's going to cause the calcium to be released in order for the muscle to contract. So the nerve impulse travels down the axon of the nerve. The ACH, the neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, gets released across this space called a synapse. That neurotransmitter will travel down deep into the muscle, release the calcium, cause the contraction. So if Jed wakes up one day and he's like, I can't move my arm, there's a lot of reasons why it might not work, because there's a lot of things that could possibly go wrong. It could be that the nerve impulse isn't getting sent. It could be that the nerve impulse is sent, but the neurotransmitter is not released. It could be that the neurotransmitter is released, but the message is not being received by the muscle. It could be that the muscle is receiving the message, but it's not releasing the calcium. So there's a lot of things that could potentially go wrong, and for each of those things, we have a different disease that we use to describe it. But here again, the impulse travels down the axon of the nerve, the acetylcholine gets released, that neurotransmitter travels down these tubes, called T-tubes, in the muscles, target the calcium to be released. That allows the safety to be taken off, the tropamine, tropomyosin to be taken off, the actin and myosin to form that cross bridge, and the muscle to contract. So this acetylcholine, this neurotransmitter, that's going to change some of the permeability in the muscles. It's an electrochemical message that's going to help release the calcium and allow the muscles to contract. So let's watch what that looks like. Here comes the message, the neurotransmitter. So notice the nerve impulse traveling down, releases the acetylcholine. that's going to travel down the T tubes. As it travels, it's going to release the calcium ions. Once the calcium ions are released, then the sarcomere will contract. All right, so the nerve impulse, the release of acetylcholine, travels down the T tubes. So the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it's like endoplasmic reticulum storing calcium. That's going to release the calcium ions. The muscle contracts. So muscular dystrophy, in this case, this particular type of muscular dystrophy, it actually releases too much calcium, causing it to actually destroy that ion, to actually destroy some of the proteins in the muscle cells. And then those proteins will be replaced by fatty connective tissue, and then that muscle won't be able to contract much more. So gradually deteriorating muscle weakness and muscle use. So what happens after the power stroke? So then we have detachment. So after the power stroke, detachment. Why do muscles cramp when you're fatigued? Well, same reason why they lock up if you have rigor mortis. That's lack of ATP. What causes rigor mortis? In this case, it's that there's no detachment, so the muscles stay contracted. Why are calcium ions important? Because they allow the cross-bridging, kind of like taking the safety off. Allow cross-bridging. What's the physiological cause of muscular dystrophy? Functionally, what's happening? In this case, too much calcium.